and welcome back. I'm moving on now to week 8, part 3. So what we're going to do in this final part is to practice and check. We're going to do a review of what we have studied so far because we are now in the middle of our term. We're in the middle of the semester. So because this is the midterm, traditionally you would have a test at this point, but we will not have a test. We're going to have our final exams only. But I would like to do a review of what we have studied before, up to today, as well as I would like you to think about how well you remember all of these things. So for part 3, we're going to be looking at a practice and check. So we're going to review what we've studied so far, and you're going to do some practice and some checking of yourself. And also I want to talk about your homework assignments for the week 8 scans because some of them need a little bit of explanation. So I'm moving to slide 22 now, and I want to do a review basically of what we've studied so far. So if you remember, in week 2 we did interviews, and we talked about introductions and what questions that you should be asking. Basically, we talked about open and closed questions and how to answer those questions. So hopefully, if you remember, open questions are the questions that start with the 5 W's. So you can remember that because your hand is open and we have 5 questions. So open questions, we cannot answer yes or no. If you think about it, if you answer yes or no to a simple question like, what's your name? Yes. It's really, really strange. So what's really important, and especially for you to teach to kids, because, especially for young kids, they're not aware of these simple points. So it's important for us to teach them these things, is to listen for the first word. So essentially, if the first word that you hear in the question is a W or a how much, how often, or something like that, you don't want to answer yes or no, because you sound crazy, basically. If, however, you hear a verb first, do, are, something like that, the trick with that is to answer using the same verb. Now, if you remember that the simplest way for you to answer a question that starts with a verb is not to answer yes or no, because you basically kill a conversation if you answer yes or no. It's to answer with the verb. So for example, if I say, are you happy today? Then you should be answering instead of yes or no. It's better, much, much better to answer, I am, or I'm not. So that, we're teaching kids basically how to use grammar, and they're also getting in the habit of using grammar well. Because as we have mentioned before in parts 1 and 2 today, but also from previously, grammar is not always very fun to study, and especially for young students, they get bored by grammar. So we should be helping them as much as possible. So remember how to answer open and closed questions is really important. And that when we're using open and closed questions in conversation, if you remember when we talked about it, if I say to, for example, if I have a student standing here and I say, oh, Taiwan, how often do you smoke? The first question we should be asking is a closed question to establish if it is true or not. But then afterwards, we want to be asking open questions. So your first questions can be, do you smoke? Or do you go out? Do you go out on Saturdays? Yes, I do. How often do you go out on Saturdays? Or who do you go out with on Saturdays? We can get more questions once we have established what the basic parameters are. So for conversation, if we want to get more information, open questions are the best. But to start from the very beginning, often we want to start with a closed question. So moving on now, I'm going to move on now to our week 3 review. So in week 3, we were talking about academic English basics, or English academic basics. These are true, I think, for any time that you're giving presentations, anytime you're writing anything in English. These are really basic, very practical skills, and they're really important for you to use because they show your level of education. And especially in your 4th year when you're giving your English interviews and you know, you're applying for jobs, this is a really simple way for you to establish that you are qualified, that you have a good knowledge of English. So in the first case is when you're writing something that you use a title. So titles, in this case, what we're referring to are titles for names, Mr., Mrs., and like that, but also we're using these specifically titles like titles of books, titles of magazines, songs, movies, whatever. In this case, whenever we're using a title, please remember the basics that are, you should always be using capital letters. So the first letter or the first word is always capitalized, the last word is always capitalized, and the major words in the middle. Your titles should be less than 5 words. They should not be questions. They should not be sentences. I mean, you can ask a question, I guess, but you're better off making the title your main topic of your paragraph, the general topic, and your feeling about that. Next, we talked about English style names. So remember that your English style name is identical to your Korean style, except we changed the order. Okay, so Korean style, we put the family name first, given name second. In English, it's opposite. We put the family name, the given name first, family name second. So, the next thing we talked about were indents. So if you remember, indents are the little space at the beginning to show that we're starting a new topic, a new paragraph. So an indent is the little tiny space at the beginning of your paragraph. Next, we talked about 10 sentence paragraphs, and that we have a definite pattern to these different sentences. So we introduce with 2 sentences, we give a detail 1 with 2 sentences, detail 2 with 2 sentences, detail 3 with 2 sentences, and your conclusion. Don't forget the conclusion, because the conclusion and the introduction go together. And it's a really effective, very simple, practical way for you to show that you're finished talking about your topic. The other important point that we established in week 3 is this lovely clear shape. Okay, so remember that this shape, when we give our first sentence, we put a period, and then sentence 2 starts immediately after that period. They're right next to each other. Then sentence 2, period. Sentence 3 starts immediately after. So your paragraph should be 10 sentences and all together in one block shape. So that block shape is what I call a paragraph shape. So remember, please, to use your paragraph shape or your block shape, whichever, it doesn't really matter what you want to call it. I'm just going to call it a paragraph shape because you know what it means. And the final point was that we talked about subject-verb agreement. So usually this is most difficult in present tense, because when we talk about the third person, so for example, I eat a sandwich for lunch, then we want to talk about the other person, not me, not you, but the third person, he or she, then we need to add that S, okay? So he or she eats a tuna sandwich for lunch, then we need that S. And that's often where students get confused and they forget about the S, or they add S too often. So please be careful. Remember that we have discussed these, so you should be very comfortable with these. If you're not, you can always go back, look at the video again, or you can do reviews online, or talk to me and I'll give you some review work if you want. Moving on now, we're working on week 5. So if you remember in week 5, and I'm going to review this also for next week, week 5 we talked about articles. Now articles, if you remember, are not these types of articles, not from a newspaper, but when we were talking about articles, we were talking about the use of a or the. So in the example that I gave earlier, if you remember, I was talking about these 2 candles. So we have a purple candle and a brown candle, remember? So in this case, I'm using the articles a. Do you remember what a defines? So I'm hoping that what you noticed is that I just changed the colors. So we have 2 candles, but we're just talking about, just a regular candle, a candle, and another candle. Okay, a candle, a candle. So the only difference really is about the colors. So we have a purple candle and a brown candle. A just shows one of many. Okay, we have many, 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 many. So we have a desk, a chair, a table, a window, a door, lots and lots of choices. But once we choose something specific, now, because I've spoken to you about these candles, I can now say the purple candle is in a metal tin. The brown candle is in a glass jar. So now I can define the, because we have already discussed this. So in the second circumstance, when I'm talking about the same object, I'm going to use the word the. Now I encourage you very, 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 very strongly to use the as much as you can. It's a really good habit to get into because articles are such an important part of English and they really, really help with your fluency. So remember that in English we love counting. 80% of nouns are counted, so count your nouns, okay? Your 명사s. Also, we talked about direct questions, indirect questions, and tag questions. So remember that your direct questions are basically your regular open and closed questions. Your indirect questions are the ones that we use when we want to be more polite. So we add that little starter at the beginning, you know, oh, could you tell me? And what happens with the verb, do you remember, is the verb goes to the end. So it actually looks like, could you tell me what the time is? Okay, or could you tell me if the window is open? Whoops, sorry, I got that, oh, no, because I've added an if. Could you tell me, could you tell me what color the sky is? Okay, so the verb goes to the end. We also use do you know. So do you know what the time is? Again, the verb goes to the end. Could you tell me what color the sky is? The verb's at the end. So it's used, your indirect questions are basically used when you want to be more formal and more polite and to show you have really good skill. Tag questions are when we're, maybe 90% sure, or we're fairly sure that something is true, but we want to check. So we use the verb and we tag that verb on the end with a negative and we add the question. So it's fall, isn't it? Fall is a season, and we're getting into fall. It's a little bit chillier, but I want to check and see what you think. It is fall, isn't it? So I use is, add on the tag with the negative, isn't it? Tag questions. Now, also, I wanted to make sure that everyone is clear about the paragraph framework because I'm noticing, like, for example, if you remember from part 1 video, that many students aren't using 10 sentences. It's really important for you to do this because we're going to expand from paragraphs into essays soon. So to do that, you really, really need to have this structure down in your mind as being a very strict structure. So what you want to do is you want to work with your paragraph framework. So I gave you a picture here of a hamburger. So the top bun is your introduction. Then we have our 3 details. So you can have detail 1, detail 2, detail 3. They've given you like a tomato, some lettuce, and your meat. And then you've got your bun again at the end. So your introduction and your conclusion are similar, bread, bread, but they're not identical. So please remember that we're working on 2 sentences for each, and they should be interesting. So remember that you're wanting to include as much detail and as much information as you possibly can. So moving on now to slide 25. In week 6, we talked about how to develop your paragraphs, and we also talked about citing. So how to cite, I gave you your basic framework. So remember that your citations basically are to show you where you got your information from. So we want to find the book title, we want to get the author's name, and we want to look inside the book to get the publisher's information and what date it was published on. Also, we talked about transition words. Now remember that your transition words are really important for showing where you are in your paragraph. So if you're talking about your detail 1, it's very clear that this is your detail 1. Also, this is very effective for you writing and for speaking because this helps you to remember where you are and to make sure that you're following that system, that same pattern, and doing exactly what you're supposed to do. So, so we've got the citations, we're showing the transition words, which show when you're changing to the next detail. So essentially what we're doing is we're trying to develop the paragraph to go from, the word to the sentence, from the sentence to 2 sentences, 3 sentences, and then moving forward using transition words so that we show this clear development and we end up with this lovely paragraph. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, that was our practice or checking section. What we're going to do now is see how well you do remember. So we're going to apply the knowledge that you have learned so far in this semester. And what I'm hoping for is that by us going over these issues, that each time that you write, you're looking at these things and you're thinking about yourself and fixing your paragraphs as you write. Now, this will help you for yourself, but also in the future for you as teachers, this will help you to focus on your students' mistakes and to help them to make their language skills better. The most important point about this is if you're making mistakes, that's not a problem, but fix them. Make your writing better and better and better. Because, of course, if you find your mistakes and fix them, you get those points. If I find your mistakes and fix them, you lose those points. So, very practically, which is better? Definitely for you to get the points. So, we're moving on now to the Week 8 assignment. So, your Week 8 assignment is for you to use that book that you chose from last week. So this is now your second English book that you've chosen. In this case, I did want you to choose an English book, and I'm hoping it's interesting. Anything you do, any subjects you choose, topics you choose, books you choose, should be interesting to you, because why would you want to write about something that you're bored by? Anyway, so that book that you chose from last week, that you chose for this week, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about that book. Now, if you wish to, I recommend that you write it down, so that you do something like what we did last week with the brainstorming. So what I want you to do is just sit down for 5 minutes, in a quiet spot, and think about why you chose your book. So if you want to, you can write this down and, put your book title in the middle and why do you like the book, and give yourself a little brainstorm. You can think about 5 questions to ask yourself, and I would usually think about the 5 W's here, like who, what, where, when, why. So who, did someone recommend it? Who recommended it to you? Who is in the book? You could talk about the characters. What is the book about, or what attracted you to the book? Where did you get the book from? When did you get the book? Did you buy the book? Did you get it from the library? And why? Why did you choose this book of all of the millions of books in the world? Okay? And remember, be honest, it's no problem if you just opted to, it just looked good online or something. There's no problem with that. The most important point is that you're communicating your thoughts and what you did. Remember also that you can ask yourself questions in a variety of ways, so that you have a variety of answers that are possible. So the next thing I'd like you to do is to brainstorm. And again, if you wish to write it, fantastic. If you don't want to write it, that's not a problem either. But what the important point is that you're sitting and thinking about this, that you're giving yourself 10 minutes or 20 minutes of time to sit down and give yourself the time to think. These are, writing paragraphs and longer pieces of writing, it takes time. So one of the most important things you can do is to take the time to sit down and think about it before you write. Because if you do that simple step, the writing becomes so much easier. The same for presentations. And I also recommend this for Korean as well. English, Korean, it doesn't matter the language. So brainstorm. So you need to organize your thoughts and decide, okay, what tense are you going to use? Are you going to use past tense? Then you should try to keep past tense verbs pretty much throughout. So maybe 80% to 90%, even more of your verbs should be focused on that particular tense. And remember that the tense shows when it happened, okay? So also you need to think about what your main topic is going to be. Are you going to talk about, what the book is? Are you going to talk about why you chose the book? Are you going to talk about who recommended the book or the characters in the book? What are your main topics going to be? And your title should reflect this. Also, you should be focusing in on the 3 details that you wish to talk about, what was interesting for you, and what you want to talk about, because of course you have many choices, many choices. And our final wonderful step is write. So I would like you please to write 1 paragraph, so 10 sentences about why you chose the book and why this book was particularly interesting to you. So of course I'm hoping that this is that it's clear that I'm expecting this to be a separate book. You should be practicing. So if you're using the same book again, that's useless. What we want to do is we want to get another book and we want to analyze our feelings and express and communicate what your thoughts are, okay, effectively and clearly, because this is the whole point of practical English. So the other thing that I would like you to do is I want you to practice citing again. So you should cite your book, and what I'm going to ask you to do is, so you're going to write your paragraph. Remember, you're using your title, you're writing your name and your student number together, indent, and then we're keeping our beautiful paragraph shape. Then at the end of the paragraph, you're going to separate it by a line, and then underneath the paragraph, you're going to write your citation. So remember that you're going to write this at the end, and your citation I'm going to give you in the next slide is how to do it. So don't worry, that's no problem. So once again, how do you cite a book? Let's take a look at slide 31. On slide 31, once again, I've given you the basic format. Now, citing can change. So this is for my class. We're going to use this style of citation, but generally we follow this type of pattern. Anyway, the information that we're giving here is what you do need for your citation. So you need to start with the family name, but remember that English style, the family name comes second, not first, right? So it's the last name. So the family name, then the given name. Okay, so family name, comma, given name. Then we put a period, and we're going to put the book title next. Now we're adding one more thing, which is coming from your scans, which I'm going to talk about in a minute as well, is your book title should be underlined. Okay, so again, there are different ways to show when it is a book title, but we're going to use this format for now in our class. Then we put a period and we talk about the city, state, province, or country, whatever the information is, or whatever information is available on the publisher's page. And you also need to give your publisher as well as the date that it was published. Remember to give the most recent date if you have a variety of dates that are there. So if you have any questions again, feel free to email me. Moving on to slide 32. Now this is really important, and this is a big part of our practice for this particular week, is as you are writing, please fix your mistakes. You can, or if you are more comfortable, and actually it usually works better, if you have extra time, write it as you're writing it, think about it, deal with it, and then 20 minutes later or a day later, go back and look over it again. This is called proofreading, and look to see if you have made any mistakes, get a red pen and fix them. So what I'd like you to do for your week 8 assignment is to hand in a perfect, beautiful paragraph. Please do not put the questions in the paragraph, because if you remember from when we spoke before about questions, if your answer is clear, then I will understand what the question is. So you have no need to put the questions in the paragraph itself. Also, please remember to cite at the end, separate it from the paragraph by 1 line, and remember to put the citation in. I've put it in there for your week 8 assignment. This is essentially a practice test. It is not a real test, okay, so don't worry about it. This is just for me to check, to assess and see how well everyone is understanding what we have studied together so far. So, we're almost at the end. Very good. You've done a great job. You stuck with it. What we're going to do now is we're going to talk about the Spectrum Language Arts Grade 4 scans for this week, because I've given you a couple extra ones. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with the helping verbs. So the helping verbs, I've given you actually 2 sheets this time. Because in this case, this is an example of what I was talking about earlier, is that in the first case we have separate individual sentences, so that these are all just simple problem-solving sentences. And then in the next case, we've moved it to paragraphs. So this is more conversation level, and this is how it's used in a variety of ways. So talking about the helping verbs, what I'd like you to do. Now here they've asked you to circle the helping verbs and underline the main verbs, but actually what I'd like you to do is to bold the helping verbs and to underline the main verbs. So I've given you an example in the on the answer sheet. Bolding is when it looks much blacker and darker. So first one and second one, please, same style. And then what I'd like you to do is moving on to lesson 2.4. Lesson 2.4 is talking about titles. So in this case, I'm not going to work on I'm just going to give you the initial worksheet. So there's not too much to do. You're just going to give me what you would have written in the blanks, but please remember to make sure that you are focused on what we're studying for the capitalizing movies, books, and song titles, and you're underlining where you need to. So moving on to lesson 3.4, what I've done is I've given you a few sheets. So the first one here is talking about irregular past tense verbs, and these are really common and can be confusing. So in the first case, you just need to rewrite the sentences using past tense verbs. But what I've also done is I've given you some review work. So in this case, I've given you review work. There's only 3 questions here for this one, so make sure that you're clear about these things. And for the review work here, you have a crossword here, which you can do if you want to, but I'm not asking you to do that, okay? So I only want you to fill in the blanks for 7, but in this case, you just need to give me the past tense verbs, okay? So I've written everything, I think, quite clearly on the PowerPoint and in the on the assignment sheets. But of course, as always, if you have any questions, you are very, very welcome to email me and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Take care, have a lovely week, and I will speak to you in a week's time, I guess. Bye-bye.